please welcome to the podium John Stossel, who's going to highlight his book. Thank
you. It's true. My experience with Sally is one of the reasons I left ABC. But I do have to correct her on that. I don't want the royalties. I actually give that away, but I do need you to buy copies for everybody just to get me on the bestseller list with Rachel Maddow. Because when you're on the list, they discount the book, and then more people get it, and these ideas get out to more people. Yes, we can, obviously, is a response to the last election's frenzy. I mean, no, they can't is a reaction to this. The yes, we can frenzy from the last election, where we, in their eyes, meant government. I mean, maybe some of the people saying, yes, we can, they felt we'll get together as a group and change America, and that's great, because we, as individuals, do stuff like that. But clearly, after the election, the president felt we meant government. Before he was elected, he even said, you may remember, we elect him, it'll bring us to the moment when the rise of the oceans began to slow and our planet began to heal. It's like he was Moses. I bring that up because people look at politicians that way. And why is that? I think it's instinctive. There's something in us that makes us want to trust a leader. And the polls say people don't trust government. Congress has, what, a 12% approval rating now? But when the next crisis happens, people will say, there ought to be a law. Government has to do something. Think about one of the last crises, 9/11. That scared us. I assume it scared me more than you. I live in Manhattan. So I didn't blanch when Congress said we have to take over airline security. You may remember at the time it was being done by private contractors. Often they paid minimum wage. It wasn't that they did anything against the rules. The FAA rules allowed those small knives and box cutters that the hijackers used. But after 9/11, Tom Daschle said, he was the Senate Majority Leader at the time, he said, you can't professionalize if you don't federalize. And you laugh, but they voted 100 to 0 to create the TSA. So how's that working out for us? And again, you can laugh at that, but we don't know. Maybe they prevented some terrible thing from happening. We don't know that because it's secret, and also the two instances we do know about, the shoe bomber and the underwear bomber, they didn't stop. It was the passengers, not any government that stopped that. What we do know is that the current TSA spends 10 times on screening what the old system spent, 10 times. And you've heard about the invasions of privacy and all that, but what interested me was that the law allows airports around the country to opt out and go back to private screening if they want to. And it would still be under TSA rules, supervised by the federal government, but they would have a choice. And one big city did, and that was yours. And I sent producers to interview people at San Francisco Airport, and people said odd things like, gee, these screeners are friendlier, and the line moves more quickly. So everybody likes to complain about the TSA, but is this your experience? Is it not as bad as other airports? That's because it's a private contractor. So why is a private contractor different? Well, because he can get fired, and his own money is at stake. He invested. Government never fires itself. Also, another incentive, he can get rich. If he does a good job, other airports may hire him, and he'll make more money. So he does better. How does he do better? Why are they both friendlier and faster? And better at their jobs. The TSA did undercover stings, and maybe they were looking to embarrass them. They tried to smuggle contraband through. And the San Francisco screeners were better, much better, at finding the contraband than those screeners in Los Angeles, the government screeners. So why are they better? Well, because he innovates. He tries stuff. This guy runs contests. He calls them March Madness. The screener can win $1,000 or $2,000 if they're faster at unpacking or repacking luggage needs, or if they find the fake pipe bomb in there when they do. It rewards people for being courteous to passengers. And the screeners themselves have a better attitude. They take pride in their job. They know that they've been tested and that they're good at it, unlike the government workers who are going through the motions. Competition, the private sector, does everything better. But central planning still appeals to people. I mean, life is complex. People have lives. You can't pay attention to everything. I can't get my brain around how you build a sewage treatment plant myself, for example. You want some expert to take care of this stuff, and we tend to elect the smartest guy in the room. I mean, he was in the Harvard Law Review. You really have to be academically smart to be on the Harvard Law Review, and it's sort of logical to people that these wise men can then direct the economy. I think I based the book on intuition versus reality. And I think we intuit that central planning works because we grow up that way. Mommy and daddy run our lives. And we intuit because it's in our evolution. For thousands of years, your ancestors lived in groups of 50 or 100 small tribes, and you needed to follow the clan leaders. If you didn't harvest the fruit when they said you should, you might have died and not given birth to us. So we're programmed to follow the leader. But that doesn't work in a country of 300 million people or a world of 7 billion people. What does work is the invisible hand. But that's not intuitive, that impersonal market forces can solve problems. I like how Hayek put it, the spontaneous order. But that's not intuitive either. If you'd never seen a skating rink and I told you I wanted to invent one and bring it here, I'm a greedy businessman, you're the regulators, we're going to put ice in this arena and we're going to let people strap sharp blades to their feet and zip around at high speed, young and old, with no more rules than go counterclockwise. You would say, you can't do that, you got to have skating police or skating stoplights or something. It's hard to imagine a spontaneous order in which people can work this stuff out on their own. Sometimes people who don't hate capitalism will tell me, all right, well, maybe your capitalism works for a lot. You know, I give you credit for that. For cell phones, computers, movies, music, simple stuff is fine. But when it comes to the complicated things and the crucial things, like healthcare or education, you got to have government because the customer doesn't know enough. I mean, the customer doesn't know enough in education because you don't know what the curricula should be, and you don't know who's a good teacher. You need PhDs in education to guide the schools. And healthcare, there was a New Yorker article that was sort of interesting about healthcare. The two doctors are talking, and one says, you know, there's free market in healthcare stuff. Where do they get this? You're having a heart attack and you're in the taxi and you're going to then suddenly start doing research on which hospital is better and what the costs are. Who thinks up this stuff? Well, Adam Smith, for one. Free market does work, and it works even for the complicated things. One way to think about it is to take something else complicated. That's cars. Do you understand why one car runs better than another or safer than another? I don't. Most of us are not automotive engineers. But consider the worst you can buy here in California and compare it to the absolute best that the central planners could produce. You younger people may not know this is the pride of the Soviet bloc. People waited 2 years to get this car, the Trabant. It was made by the East Germans. And East Germans, they were rocket scientists. It's a lousy car, driven them, it's harder, the wheel doesn't turn easily, and smokes. Put the oil and gas in separately and shake the car to mix them together. And yet this was the best they could do. And when the Berlin Wall went down, the Trabant disappeared because it and the Yugo, the others, could not compete with mediocre stuff made in the free society. Why not? Because not everybody has to be an expert for the free market to work its magic. You just need a few people, a few car buffs, a few people who read the car magazine. And the good news and bad news spread. The good companies thrive, the bad ones atrophy. The free market will protect the ignorant about even complicated things, including health care and education, if we let it. But government keeps growing and keeps saying, you know, look, we have evidence that we're making life better. And they produce slides like this one. The head of OSHA under President Clinton is fond of showing this. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Again, intuition made sense. People were getting killed in factories. The government says this is unacceptable out of greed. Factory owners are going to have unsafe work conditions. We must set standards. Now the rule book is this thick, and nobody, even the lawyers specialized, can really understand what's in it or agree on it. But they say, look how many lives we've saved because of this. And it would be impressive if researchers hadn't gone back to before OSHA and noticed that the slope of the line doesn't change. Government's like somebody who gets in front of a parade and claims to have led the parade. Things in a free society get better on their own. Why? Because wealthier is healthier. As we get richer, we care more about safety. We get smarter. When the accident happens, you take steps to assure it won't happen again. Even the selfish, greedy factory owner does it, if only because it costs him money to retrain workers to replace the ones he kills. How about the war on poverty? It's another example like this. Lyndon Johnson was going to fix poverty, Great Society. And they created welfare, and the poverty rate dropped sharply the first 5 years, but then, as you know, it stopped. It's gone up and down since then. This is because government programs have nasty, unintended side effects. They taught dependency. They taught women to not get married because that cost them money. They hurt America with that rule, but they could still say, well, at least for 5 years we lifted people out of poverty. And you could give them that, except here too. We went back to before the war on poverty. And you see, people were lifting themselves out of poverty already, even faster. Because that's what people do if you leave them alone. But it's not intuitive, and so government grows. Thomas Jefferson said it's the natural progress of things for government to grow and liberty to yield. And that's what's happened. Here's a graph of the growth of the federal government since the beginning of America. The big blips of the world wars. Here we take 10-year increments to smooth it out. You see what's happened the first 150 years when we grew the fastest. Government was just a couple % of the economy. Only since the Great Society has it started to go straight up to the unsustainable levels we have now. Now it's 40% of the economy if you include state and local spending. And as you know, we can't afford to pay to keep the promises the politicians have made. Mainly because of my generation, the baby boomers, we rudely refuse to die. And we want our Medicare. When Social Security passed, most people my age were already dead. The numbers no longer add up. They were $40 trillion in the hole. But when somebody proposes cuts, they call him a social Darwinist. And even the Republicans are reluctant to cut anything. Why is America prosperous so far? I have a nonprofit that offers free to school teachers some of the videos that I've done on television, ABC, and now on Fox. ABC sold them to us, Fox gives them to us. It's actually run by Andrea Rich. Some of you may know her. She used to run Laissez-Faire Books. And one of the more popular ones in this series is one where I ask kids, why is America prosperous? And the high school students have no idea. They say, come on, 7 billion people on Earth, 2 billion live on a buck or two a day. Fewer than 1 billion have anywhere near our level of prosperity. How come we have it? And finally someone will say, we have democracy. And we're a relatively new country, so we have natural resources. And I say, well, India has democracy and natural resources. India's poor. And they say, well, India's overpopulated. And I reply that New Jersey has the same population density as India. New Jersey's doing okay. All right, well, you Californians may not think so. And what about Hong Kong? And this was Milton Friedman's insight. Hong Kong has no natural resources. It's just a rock. And no democracy, never had it. It's had the British rulers and now the communist Chinese. And yet Hong Kong went from third world to first world in 50 years. They lifted themselves out of poverty in a record time. Why? What did they have? Well, they had the ingredients of prosperity. We know what works. They had economic freedom and rule of law. You need rule of law. You need to be safe in your person and property. The worst places to live are the African countries where they don't have rule of law, where you have a corrupt judiciary. Everybody's afraid to build a factory because your neighbor may just steal what you make, or the dictator may confiscate your whole factory. Won't respect your private property. So you need deeds and private property, and then you need freedom. And they had that in Hong Kong because the British rulers kept people from killing each other, or stealing from each other. And then they sat around and drank tea. Benign neglect. They left free people alone. Free people, left alone, made themselves rich. Capitalism works. It's lifted billions of people out of poverty, and yet people hate it. It's been hated in every newsroom I've been in and in most universities where I've visited. Somebody came up to me in the street in New York and said, "Are you John Stossel?" "Yes." "I hope you die soon." So I'm trying to figure out what's this hatred about. And at first I thought it was because they considered me a conservative. And where I live, it's probably similar to here. A conservative is like being a child molester. It's the worst thing. But I'm a lousy conservative. I'm a libertarian. I think homosexuality is just fine. And I think prostitution, sex work, should be legal between consenting adults. I think drugs should be legal for adults, and so forth. I think adults should be free to do anything that's peaceful. So, why do they hate me so much? I think it's because I'm a consumer reporter who now defends business, and they hate business. Trying to understand what's that about. And maybe it's the wealth disparity. They don't like that. They're uncomfortable with it. Their college professors trash business, maybe because the professor's annoyed that his slightly stupider roommate, who went into business, is richer than he is. And there's a general discomfort with the fact that some of our Silicon Valley neighbors have billions. We have envy. Some people mind that. I'm trying to get my brain around that and thinking, is it the wealth disparity? And then I think about the kings and queens of old Europe. And there the wealth disparity was even greater. And yet they were not hated, they were revered. But people hated the merchants. They gave them that nasty name, the bourgeoisie. They hated the very people they needed to sell them the stuff that made their lives better. What's that about? And again, I think it's this intuition-reality division, that the intuition says that business is a zero-sum game, and if somebody makes a profit, they gain off of you, and you've lost something. And I see why politicians think that way, because their world is zero-sum. One wins, one loses. But business isn't, because business is voluntary. Only two ways to do things in life, right? Voluntary or forced. Government is force. And as I said, we need some force. But the best of life is voluntary. And when I say business is voluntary, it's not like there's this pie and Bill Gates took a big piece and we have less. To get rich, Bill Gates, anybody, has to serve their customers well, give us what we want. He baked thousands of new pies, made us all rich. Business doesn't happen unless it's win-win. You see it in every transaction, even the simplest. You buy a cup of coffee this morning, She had the weird double thank you moment. You know, you give her the buck, she gives you the coffee, you say, thank you, thank you. Why do you both say thank you? Because you wanted the coffee more than you wanted the buck. She wanted the buck more than she wanted the coffee. It didn't happen unless you both won. Business makes us all richer. Capitalism works. Free markets aren't perfect. There will always be scams, some end-runs, some Bernie Madoffs, but they're pretty rare in our $16 trillion economy. It's remarkable how seldom it happens. And the best protection against it is not layers of rules from Sarbanes-Oxley and Dodd-Frank that nobody understands. The best protection is market discipline, which means no privileges and no bailouts. If you cheat people and word gets out, you fail, you go out of business. If you're reckless, you fail, you go out of business. That protects us better than government ever can. Economic freedom under those rules creates prosperity. Economists focus on the prosperous part of that. The freedom part is just as important. I object to big government not just because it makes us poor, but it's a moral objection. When government reduces our control over our own lives, it makes us less. If we can't tell the mob or even our neighbors to leave us alone, we become smaller. Government sucks the life out of people, crowds out good things. It cuts the tendrils of civil society. It tells charities, don't bother, we're taking care of this. That's why when politicians say, yes, we can, I have this fantasy that all of you, the Tea Party, everybody around the country will rise up and they'll make these signs and go to state capitals like Sacramento and say, no, you can't. No, they can't. Hey, it's a fantasy. It might happen. If you want to take a picture with the sign later, please. Frederick Hayek said the curious task of economics is to teach men how little they know about what they imagine they can design. And that's my goal. I hope to work on Bill O'Reilly to convince him soon. But saying that government cannot do it it's not the same thing as saying we can't. We can. We as individuals accomplish all kinds of things. As groups of individuals, banding together as clubs, charities, community groups like this one. As families working toward common goals. Or as greedy, profit-seeking entrepreneurs pursuing their own self-interest. What has that given us? Lipitor, robotic limbs, hip replacements, computers, iPhones, flush toilets, air conditioning. We take this stuff for granted, but it's from capitalism. Poor people now have access to food, entertainment, shelter, travel, information, lifespans that exceed what kings had a century ago. But we don't think of it. We trash capitalism, accept its gifts without thinking. You don't thank capitalism when you go to a supermarket and you see 30,000 products on the shelves and they're unbelievably cheap and the place is well lit and nice and open all the time and they rarely poison you. The Detroit Medical Center at the beginning of Obamacare said, proudly announced, we're going to use barcodes now to keep track of medical records. And isn't that great? We're the first big medical center in the country to do that. Everybody applauded. It was good that they did that. But supermarkets did that for candy and Coke 30 years ago. Healthcare is obviously more important, but it didn't happen in healthcare because government has crowded out the free market in healthcare, and they don't make sensible innovation. We take it for granted that we can go to a foreign country, stick a piece of plastic in the wall, and cash will come out. And we can give that same piece of plastic to a total stranger, and he'll rent you a car for a week. And when you get home, Visa or MasterCard will have the accounting correct to the penny. If they don't, you'll be upset and complain. But government can't even count votes accurately. And so now we're going to turn healthcare over to government? Give me a break. Government fails, but individuals succeed. Thank you for fighting for the freedom that made America possible. Thank you very much.
John, as always, terrific. And John has agreed to spend the next sort of 10, 15 minutes answering questions, so I'm sure you will have questions. I'll just say back about 40 years ago in Canada, when the supermarkets, private supermarkets, brought in barcodes, the provincial government thought it was a terrible idea, and they tried to ban barcodes. But in a case, fortunately, supermarkets won. But government doesn't like innovation. So please.
And by the way, just before I take the first question, I should say that part of the story that Sally was in, we went to Canada and we found places where you got great health care. Right away, cutting edge technology. It just was that you had to meow or bark to get that. Vet care is still private. Yeah. But also, why don't you say who you are so your neighbors get to know you?
It's understandable why there are a lot of academics who meet liberally during the Eiffel Tower protected. Why are there not more people like you in journalism? Because the whole job is truth-seeking, examining evidence, and reaching conclusions.
I don't have his question, for those of you who couldn't hear it, is he understands why the academia is so liberal or socialist. We're liberals. Why the media? Why it's their job ferreting out truth? Why is there so much leaning to the left? I don't have a great answer, except that maybe it's a left brain, right brain thing. And there are the people who analyze and the people who emote. As Bill Clinton said, I feel your pain. And the people who analyze go into science and business. And as I say, the book is about intuition being wrong. And the people who emote go with their intuition. Their intuition just leads them to believe that the central planners will make our lives better. And they don't hang around to really watch and analyze how it makes things worse. Yes?
My name is Jason Crawford. I'm with the Golden Gate Projectionists. So Stossel, great talk. Thank you. How do you respond to the
He's got a charity that is trying to give away Ayn Rand books. Donors can read an essay and decide if they want to give someone a copy of Atlas Shrugged or not.
freeobjectivistbooks.com. Thank you very much. How do you respond to the accusation of capitalism maybe leads to wealth, but it leads to inequality, income inequality? It's not equal wealth for everyone.
Yes, it does. It's a byproduct of freedom. It will lead to income inequality. So what? That's not a great answer. It doesn't work for a lot of people, and so you get persuasive to people millionaire tax and stuff like that. And I'm grossed out at the Larry Ellisons of the world that don't give any money to charity. On the other hand, he's good at making money. If he gives it upon his death, then he's doing a good thing, because his skill is making money, not giving it away. But I'm grossed out by the billionaires who just let their children have it, because their children become parasites and socialists. They have no clue about earning money. Yes?
My name is John Alvarado. I'm a software engineer from Silicon Valley. You'll sell software to anyone in when you say that so many of the innovative products, computers, microtechnology, advanced medicine, have come from the capitalist side of the spectrum, people might say almost all of those things began as defense research. Air conditioning is a great example, microtechnology is a great example, or space research. How could you, capitalists, get along without the government doing the original research? How do you answer this?
I answer it by saying the intranet was a tiny piece that would have stayed useless to consumers forever were it not for the private sector. I guess I should first say, yes, many developments came first from some cutting-edge government research. the NIH, for example, but only 5% of the drugs we have now come via research funded by the NIH. The other 95% come from the private sector. So the space program, what do we get? We got promos for Tang. We got CAT scans and some other things from that technology, but they spent a fortune, and we haven't been back to the moon since. And now there's the X Prize, run by an entrepreneur. Some rich people give $1 million, and Bert Rutan figures out how to get into space. And competitors, just because competition's cool, spend much more than the $1 million prize trying to win the $1 million prize, and we get much more development from the X Prize for millions than we do from NASA for billions. Yes, in the back.
Hi, my name is Ken Burke. I'm a frustrated California.
A lot over here.
Native California. I think what I'm most frustrated about is the media and the politicians and how they're allowed to communicate to their constituents or to the general population out and out lies and be given just a pass. Now, there could be a borderline of truth somewhere, but it's so buried or hidden that the general public looks at the headline, doesn't read the rest. What do? How do we change it? We know they can't, but what do we do?
Well, I think there's a fairly simple answer to that. You buy everyone a copy of No.
I'll take one.
But more seriously, the reporters want to get it right, and a lot of them are just ignorant and they're busy. So when you see the wrong story, they don't get much mail, and a letter to the editor can make a difference. So write, speak up. That's all we can do is try. Thomas Jefferson said, it's the natural progress of things, so maybe we can't succeed, but even if we slow the growth of government, that could save America. Oh. Can you speak up? I was air conditioning.
I think there's bipartisan support for common pension reform in California, so that you don't have towns like Vallejo and Stockton going ways of Pritchard, Alabama. We've seen a real trend towards the compression in the private sector, not so much in the public sector. Last year, our last election, Meg Whitman came up with some solution for a 401k, as opposed to the current public pension system. My question for you is, what's the laissez-faire approach? What's the libertarian approach to what I think both sides of the aisle agree is California's probably number one problem as far as the budget and public pensions?
Just before I answer, what's your profession?
I thought you might say he was a CPA. I think the libertarian answer is defined benefit plans, so people own their retirement accounts and it should be voluntary. But I'm struck by this one. This is a big one. A year ago, all these states have these pension plans that are toast, and they're assuming 8% growth a year, when I make it 0.5% a year, maybe. And I'm reading about it. There are two guys from Reason, Bill Eggers, I think, who has written about it very well. And I'm thinking, this is just too boring ever to put on television. And even when I say defined benefit plans, I can feel people changing the channel. And yet the needle has moved on this one too. More people are aware of it. The nice thing about municipalities is they can't print their own money. So when it is unsustainable, they will go the way of Pritchard, Alabama, and take big, nasty haircuts. And the Vallejo politicians got punished, right? And maybe more places are waking up. But if we could find a sexier way to talk about retirement plans, that would be good.
In
10,000, 20,000 people come out to hear somebody talk about the Constitution, and they're young people. They're people who can change something. That's very encouraging. We should all be working towards that end of changing their minds.
Well, I'd be encouraged too if I saw 8,000 people, but I see about 8. I assume maybe you're talking about a Ron Paul rally. He told me that he got 7,000 at one here in California, and I said, so are they for economic liberty, or are these just leftists who are angry about military spending? And he said, well, maybe that, but look, I talked to him for 45 minutes, and I talk about the whole spiel, so they hear it, so maybe they're learning. I don't know. But it's great that Ron Paul is getting all this attention. Giselle.
Giselle, Dr. New Foundation. I want to go back to what you said about the person who walked up to you in New York and said, die. I just ran into an experience not like that, where the people I was with said, you're the only nice Republican I ever met. They're New Yorkers. No, they didn't want it. So there is, right there, you have that curtain, that the minute you start talking that way, it's dropped, and they're not listening to anything you have to say, no matter how rational it is, or, when I say to people like that, you think the government does a good job? I mean, what? And I go through the litany of how it doesn't, then they say, okay, you're right. Look, the people in Washington are not half as smart as you are. You, the person sitting in front of me, oh yeah, that's right. But, it gets lost, because when you start speaking to people, they immediately dismiss you if they think you're a capitalist or a Republican, and they really have a gut reaction to that. How do we overcome that?
You buy them a copy.
They know who you are, John. They go, okay.
And it's true. And once, you notice it doesn't say Fox on the cover anywhere. Once they see that, the curtain will drop off. Look, I've lost friends who will just not even discuss these things. You're beyond the pale if you don't support these ideas. And there's a guy who just wrote a book on it, and it's people, if they're friends, it's not about logic for many people. But fortunately for the young people, and this is why I'm doing Stossel in the classroom, we're going to get to the high school kids before they put the curtain down. And by the way, Andrea Rich is in her 70s, and if somebody else wants, someday to manage an education charity, I encourage you to contact me and express an interest in Stossel in the classroom. If any of you, we don't take any pay for it, and if any of you want to contribute to send the stuff to the teachers, I would love to get a card if you want to support Stossel in the classroom to reach young people before that curtain comes down. It's very tough, and that's our goal. We need models of failure to wake people up. My biggest fans come from Hungary, Poland, from the communist bloc. And now that they're getting older and the Soviet Union's been gone for a while, what do we have? We've got Cuba and North Korea and California. Maybe model of failure next time. Yeah.
Well, first I want to thank you for what you do, because I think there's nothing more powerful than a story well told, and you are a great storyteller. I wish that many of the people who have the podium would stop using only facts and start telling powerful stories, because people remember stories. They forget the facts or their eyes glaze over, right? We've all experienced that, and you have the facts to back it up, but you capture us first with the story that we all remember and can retell. And I think that's the power in what you're doing, that you're giving us stories to tell. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. And I only learned because of capitalism. Because I worked in television, and I know if I didn't make it interesting, I wouldn't get raised. I would be fired. So I had to find ways to make it interesting. Let's take one more and then I'll go sign books. Or you pick it, boss. You're the...
Any other questions? Oh, yes.
I'm Charles Gagnon from San Francisco. I was wondering, so many people in the Silicon Valley are big Obamists. And their whole life is based upon free market, and their prosperity is based upon that. And I was sort of wondering, can you make a distinction between your moral case for liberty versus the performance case for liberty? Because, clearly the performance case, they're enjoying, but they still don't want liberty.
I think a lot of them voted for Obama because they view the Republicans as social, conservative, repressive, anti-gay marriage, anti-recreational drugs, wanting to go bomb other countries to save the world. And the moral case doesn't work so much on them because I say the moral case is that individuals should be left free. It's a case for libertarianism. But that wasn't a good answer on my part. I don't have a better answer. Let's take one more question. Puts the pressure on you.
I'm Larry Siskin, I'm a lawyer, and you mentioned political parties. Could you tell us your views on the upcoming election? What do you think about the movement the Republican Party is taking as it mobilizes behind Romney? What do you see as the most likely outcome of the election?
All right, ending on the election, I have no particular insights except to say that all the pundits and experts, including the brightest, Karl Rove and Fox, have less wisdom than the wisdom of crowds, the information markets, what are they called? The futures markets. And the Republicans banned them in America. So the biggest one is in Ireland. It's called In-Trade, where you can bet real money on things like presidential elections. And by wisdom of crowds, I mean, they're going to show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where you could ask an expert or ask the audience. And they would get experts ready on the phone, and I assume the audience were morons who came to wait in line to see the show. But asking the audience was correct much more often than the experts. So there's wisdom in crowds. And in the futures markets, the betting is 60 cents for Obama to win $1, 40 cents for Romney. So he's the favorite. But I think next week Ron Paul is going to catch on and he's going to win.
Well, thank you, John. I was just going to say, when Milton Friedman was asked why is the media so liberal, he always said it's because they were all trained in public K-12 schools and then in public higher colleges and universities, and therefore all their views were liberal. So that was what he used to say. I'd like to now call on Christine Hughes, who's Vice President of Civic Research, to do the closing. And John is going to be over there signing his books and selling it, but not for the royalties, so we can give more money away for charity, and that's what we like. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much. We should have a photo session over here with your sign. Terrific. It's great to see such a good showing here. I think we have close to 90 people today. And since 1979, PRI has been championing freedom, opportunity, personal responsibility. Obviously, John has echoed that in his remarks today, and I hope you will absolutely go over and buy John's book. I just wanted to call your attention to the card that was left in each of your tables, and on the back, we just put some of our events that are upcoming, and to the gentleman in the back who asked the question, our next event here in San Francisco is a pension debate. And that's going to have David Crane, who was one of the economic advisors to Schwarzenegger, who actually is for pension reform, Dan Bornstein of the Contra Costa Times, and our own Steve Greenhut, who was editor-in-chief of our Cal Watchdog Investigative Journalism Center and is now a contributing editor and senior fellow at PRI. And Brian Kaye, who is our new editor-in-chief of Cal Watchdog, will be moderating the panel. believe it's going to be here at the City Club. So it's May 17th at lunch, not to compete with Joe Leone's dinner that evening, for those of you who are looking at that, going to that dinner. And we have other things we'll be getting you by email, dates that we firm up. But we do have, as you know, we give a gala every year, and since the presidential election is November 6th, on the Friday following that election, we have George Will, who's going to be giving us a commentary, hopefully it's a positive one, on the results of the presidential election. So I hope to see you all there, and that'll be at the Ritz-Carlton in San Francisco. So thank you so much for all of you. I know there are many supporters of PRI in this room. We appreciate your support. For those of you who are not familiar with PRI, and I have met a few of you earlier, please, I'd be happy to spend some time and introduce you to the work that we do. We also have in the back some information, and we have to continue this fight, and we appreciate any support that you can give us to do that. We are a nonprofit, and obviously we rely on private contributions to continue championing freedom. So thank you very much for coming today. Thank you.